some of the infectious agents that really hurt the world, we never have to really think about. But we call these infectious agents really forgotten because we don't really think about them in the United States. However, we should start thinking about them because they are going to be affecting us because of becoming more subtropical, especially around the Gulf and the Atlantic, right? And so if we think about some of these other things, rabies, African trypanosomiasis, dengue fever, leishmaniasis, Chagas disease, echinococcosis, ascariasis, schistosomiasis, cysticercosis, filariasis, onchocercosis, trachoma, which is really an infection of the eye, right? Trichuriasis, hookworm disease, and other types of foodborne nematode infections. So if we think about this for a minute, if we look at the entire world, here are the things that kill most of the people in the non-industrialized parts of the world, right? So you have heart disease and stroke, respiratory infections. So number 3 are respiratory infections. So these are all kinds of infectious agents that infect. Tuberculosis is probably going to be part of it, right? So then you have chronic lung conditions like pneumonia, diarrheal diseases, that's number 5, HIV/AIDS, number 6, lung cancers, diabetes, road injury, prematurity, right? So they have different types of problems than we have, because what kills people in the United States are things like heart disease, cancer, chronic lower respiratory disease that's not infectious, that's COPD, right, smoking. Stroke, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, pneumonia, kidney failure, and then septicemia is the one infectious disease that makes a list. Okay? And that's way down because only 1% of the population is really affected by septicemia.
What's septicemia?
Infection of the blood. So this is organisms that get in the bloodstream. Most of the time that's in the hospital. Okay? Yep.
How does, maybe it's a stupid question, how does Alzheimer's kill people?
They all kinds of different ways. So they don't remember things at all. Sometimes they get lost. Sometimes they freeze to death when they're lost. Sometimes they get lost we never find. There's all kinds of things that can happen.
So it's not technically the disease, it's just things that come from it?
It's
Okay.
the process of not being able
I didn't know if it was, my great-grandmother had Alzheimer's, and I didn't know if it was like a product of the disease or if it was a disease that they.
A lot of people who develop Alzheimer's also develop Parkinson's.
Oh.
So then you have a lot of other problems also.
It's a pretty big, like,
Yeah.
comparison.
And if you read the literature says that the more educated you are, the more likely you're going to develop Alzheimer's.
Really?
I'm in trouble, right? So I'm
I'm
overly
dropping
educated.
out.
Yeah.
I read that meditation can protect you from Alzheimer's.
I'm a firm believer in any kind of mechanism that allows you to kind of channel all the anxieties of the world and allow you to let those anxieties go. Meditation is really good. Exercise is really good. Yoga is fantastic if you do that.
I think being in control of your body can help with a lot of things like that.
A lot of Eastern techniques, cupping. What's the one that you do, Tram, with your mom? What's the one that you do with your mom?
Run cupping.
Yeah.
And-
So all that stuff is really great stuff.
There's a study and it says that meditation actually prevents your telomeres from degrading.
Well, so that's going to be harder for me to appreciate because really telomeres get degraded from lots of enzymes. The only thing that protects them is telomerase, right? Telomerase adds to that or protects that. So as we get older, our telomeres just get shorter and shorter. And then we develop all kinds of problems. Right? You're years away from really having to think about that, right? But I'm there already, right? So, yeah.
Do you think it's true that you can prevent, like, you can tell your body not to do something or, like, control your body with your mind? Like, did you hear
I don't
about
know.
that guy
The
in-
answer to that is yes, but I just don't think we have the mental capacity to do that.
It takes a lot of practice, they say, but there's a man in, like, Sweden, Russia, somewhere super cold, and he, like, has spent years and years and years, like, getting to be one with his body, and he can he's proven it. Like, he can jump in the icy water and keep his body temperature up to a certain
That's hard to believe. The thing that I believe about the mind is if you have a chronic illness or terminal illness and you have a positive attitude about life, that you're more likely to have a positive outcome
I've heard that.
than
I
if you
read
just
that.
simply give up, right?
Mhm.
I actually read that in psychology. I'm in a psychology class right now, and it talks about like perspective, and the healthiest individuals have the most positive perspective.
Why are you laughing?
Sam Brandon.
Oh.
Yeah, I kneed her so hard the other day on accident. It wasn't that hard, I bulldozer coming through there. Sorry, friend.
So, the latest result of things that kill United States citizens are number 1, heart disease, number 2, cancer, number 3 is cerebral vascular disease, number 4 is diabetes and comorbidities associated with diabetes, and number 5 are all accidents, which is kind of a misnomer because they lump everything that is an accident, motor vehicle accidents. They even put homicides in there and suicides, and they lump it all
What,
together.
what would the cerebral vascular disease?
Strokes,
So that would be number 3 instead.
aneurysms, yeah, those
I was
kind of
wondering
things.
if it was just strokes or something else.
Well, it's everything that's related to vascular that's not on infarct, so
Okay.
it's everything else, right? You can have a aneurysm of the brain and that'll take you out right away.
Mhm.
Didn't Rona jump up in the rankings of like for 2020?
Yes, but that, to me, that is, I don't wanna look at that as, I don't wanna include that, I wanna include that as kind of, an outlier, because it was for those years only, really, when we think about it, the average lifespan of the United States citizen went down by 2 years because of coronavirus, but to me, that's an outlier. I mean, you really can't encapsulate that and say it's a major cause of death in the United States. It was for those 2 years, but it's not over
Historically.
history, right?
Mhm.
So I don't like to really put that into those numbers, okay? So as we start to transition to talk about infections of the skin and the eyes, I want you to remember, you know, how lucky we are that we live in a place like this, even with all the problems we have, that we have very little suffering due to infectious diseases because of the infrastructure we have. Now, we do have suffering. Cancer can be a terrible disease, right? Having congestive heart failure can be a terrible disease. Having end-stage renal disease because of diabetes can be terrible. But we're not in pain a lot of the times. We're not suffering from lung capacity being diminished. We're not losing so much of our water through feces like some of the individuals who are suffering from dysentery, right, in the world. So we have a very lucky life here. No matter where you live, it's still pretty lucky, right? And so we just have to appreciate that that's where we go. If we look at the anatomical structure of the skin, yeah, it's made of an epidermal area, a dermal area, and a subcutaneous area, or hypodermis, whatever you're gonna call it. But when we think about this for a minute, there's a lot of things that are inherent, that are innate to the skin that protect us, right? Lots of things in there. I mean, for one thing, the skin is a great barrier, and there's very few organisms that can penetrate the skin. Unless there's a break or a breach in the skin, if some organism lands on your skin, it's not gonna cause you a problem. Unless there's another mechanism for which it can get into the body. Like if you get your hands contaminated with feces and then you, are you okay?
Mhm.
And then you somehow or another get that organism into your alimentary canal. That's a different ballgame. The skin itself can protect you from so many different things. It helps to regulate heat. It can be absorptive depending on what it is. It protects you. There's a lot of excretion, and in that excretion are lots of things like sebum, urea, electrolytes. All those things add to the value, and the oleic acid add to the value of the skin and how it protects you, right? So you don't want to take too many showers. You don't want to use astringents. You want to keep your skin as normal as possible, right? Pisidian corpuscles and mycelial corpuscles are in your skin. They allow you to feel that light sensation. Certain infectious agents that are skin related or also neurological related can really hamper those things, and you can lose that light touch, right? And so we'll be talking about that as it relates to infection in just a little bit. There are 3 different ways that infectious agents can affect the skin. Number 1, through direct contact, because it gets into a break or a breach in the skin. Second way is that there's a systemic infection somewhere in the body, but the symptoms are appreciated on the surface of the skin. And the third way is that you have an intoxication, and the toxins that are being produced by the microorganisms are affecting the skin. Right? So those are the 3 different ways. So here you can see an infection probably started here, but you can see how it's moving up the leg, right? And that can be pretty common, especially to somebody who is immunocompromised or has diabetes. You have to worry and watch the diabetic patients a lot of times. So one of the things when my mother was alive, I would always have her take off her shoes, and I would always look at her toes, because if there was any problems with her feet, that was going to be a significant problem to try to heal, because they have poor circulation as diabetic patients anyway. And so we were always taking care of her feet until the one time we couldn't, where she got a tack in her foot and lost her, and really got a huge infection. And I'll tell you that story when we talk about systemic infections next week. Oh, I'm sorry, the following. Okay. So here you can see is a,
So that would be an example of the third one, toxin.
which one?
I'm having trouble wrapping my head around the third.
Toxin mediated, think
Yeah.
toxic shock, scarlet fever, scalded skin syndrome,
Okay.
all those are toxin mediated.
Okay.
Okay? I've got examples coming up,
Okay.
Samantha. So here's an example of a direct infection. This, of course, is a boil. So you can see that there's a focus of infection, and the focus of infection has secretions associated with it, right? It's actually, you can see the serous sanguineous fluids coming out of it. The serous sanguineous fluids have pus in it. This particular infection needs to be laxed. It needs to be debrided, right? Yeah. Because if you don't, that's gonna get problematic. Here's a furnicle, right? So a furnicle is more compact. It has a single foci of infection, and it really hurts. Just barely touch it, and it really hurts, right? So these are how boils form, and eventually carbuncles, and we'll talk about those in just a little bit. Systemic infections that their symptomology are appreciated on the skin are things like herpes and syphilis and chickenpox, and in the old days, smallpox. We could make a correlation with smallpox to monkeypox, what's been going on for the last few months, right? Although it seems to have waned over a period of time, because people who were being affected by monkeypox have been more educated and they're taking more precautions now. And so it's kind of really nullified the spread of monkeypox in our population. Right? Doesn't mean it's not here, just means it's not spreading as quickly as it was. And then, Samantha, toxin mediated will be things like scarlet fever. Scarlet fever used to be a big problem, but over the years we've learned to manage it. Usually, scarlet fever is sequelae associated with group A strep infections of the back of the throat, strep throat. The toxins are produced by the organism, and the toxins affect the skin. Sandpaper rash. You have this redness that happens all over the body. And it can be really, really bad for, especially a child. Yep.
Is that like the Johnson and Johnson syndrome?
No, that's a little bit different, right? A lot of times that's mediated by a drug interaction, and it's really different. Okay? And so here at the bottom, Samantha, is scalded skin syndrome, which is facilitated by the toxins that are caused by Staph aureus. When scalded skin syndrome shows up, it's like the baby has second or third degree burns. And it's devastating. Here's a better picture of what the baby would look like. So you can see that the toxins that are produced by Staph aureus have caused exfoliation of the skin. This is raw tissue, right? And so it's like the baby got burned. And so a lot of times when this happens, and it's rare, but it does happen, Child Protective Services get involved, and they take the kiddo away from you until they find out that it really wasn't you, it was really Staph aureus that was causing the problem.
Can I figure that out by testing for the SRN?
Does it leave scars?
Can. we treat it like we would a burn. Yeah.
I'm trying to think about it, how it's a toxin and affecting the skin, because you said toxin is just, because they're not lesions or bruises.
So toxins have a specific mechanism by which they affect things.
So
And-
which layer of the skin would you say?
Into the dermal layer.
Dermal layer.
Yes,
Does it go away once you get older?
so we would try to get rid of it when they're still, like, the next day, right? So we would do things like give IgG to help with the toxin. We could also, do coverage with it with dressings and using things like Sulvadine or things like that to help, because we treat it like we would a burn. Okay, so hopefully it goes away like quickly, right? Because the babies, when they have open wounds like this, they're very susceptible to infections by other organisms.
So you
Okay.
get, since babies will get Staph aureus from just like some little compromised area of his or her skin.
The Staph aureus is a normal inhabitant of everybody's body.
Oh,
It's
so
here
it's
mostly.
immunocompromised baby?
Could be that they're immunocompromised, but it could be they just have a break in the skin and the organism gets in that way.
Okay, so,
It's
the
very-
first thing is like.
It's very rare. I see your little mind churning inside that brain of yours. Oh my God, I've got to worry about this now. It's
Yeah.
very rare.
So.
But, you know, if I don't show you these images of things that can happen, then why do you take this course, so that I can just give you all the superficial things? No, I want to show you every possible really bad thing that can happen, so you're not surprised in your practice when you see it, right?
So Candida albicans is the same kind of thing, everybody
Mhm.
can have
Except it doesn't cause scarlet skin syndrome. It can cause an overgrowth of the organism in the mouth, for babies usually. And it can be on the nipples of the mama, and then when the baby suckles, they can actually get, and because the babies don't have a really good immune system, all they need to have is a disruption of the normal flora, of the normal inhabitants of the mouth, and they get it. Happens like that in the vagina also.
I recently read that the Candida albicans is one of the most lethal forms of Candida, like that it can make you really sick.
I used to work in
especially
pediatric dentistry and that's
immunocompromised people.
Yes, that's true. So, my generation, the ladies and the young girls in my generation, they were given tetracycline on a daily basis for years. Because tetracycline would never allow them to have blemishes, they never have pimples. But the problem is, tetracycline has hepatic toxicity, can affect the liver, but it also gets stored in the adipose tissue of the body. And so if you get a little chunky, you can store some of it, and then you lose weight, and it comes out of the adipose, and so then it has a secondary problem. One of my closest friends took tetracycline and had beautiful skin. You just have to be careful about going out in the sun, because you get really bad, you get very sun sensitive by taking tetracycline. But what has happened to her is she has growth of Candida albicans all down her esophagus, right to her stomach. So yeah, she has to take an antifungal every day to control it.
I will say the common forms of it in babies in the mouth is, I've never seen a baby die from that.
No.
I've worked in
So I don't
pediatric
believe
dentistry
it's
for years.
lethal.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna agree with the fact that you said it's lethal. I don't think it kills people, but it does cause a lot of problems.
But with the common form of babies, it's not very scary. I can't turn, but you don't have to be.
Candida albicans is a very important pathogen because it can grow in the entire alimentary canal, because there's a disruption in the normal inhabitants of the small intestines, or the large intestines, and then it just goes crazy. But you have all kinds of problems digestively because of that, but it doesn't kill you. Okay. All right, so normal inhabitants of the skin are things like Staphylococcus, things like yeast, things like gram-negative enterics. E. coli is everywhere on your skin, accept it, it's just there. And then diphtheroids. Diphtheroids are gram-positive rods that don't have don't have a specific shape. So they're rods typically, but they can look like cocci and they can look like other things. So, but they're normally found on your skin and they protect you, right? Your skin itself, the things that happen on the skin can affect the bioload of the skin, the microbial load, right? The microbiome of the load. And the things that can do that are the temperature of the skin, the moisture, the pH of the skin, the amount of sweat that's produced, and the different types of chemicals that are produced on your skin, right? So oleic acid, urea, sebum. Most of the time, we don't have a lot of urea on the skin unless you're having kidney problems, and then the urea is not being liberated from the body, not being removed, and so that you can have the urea that's on the skin itself. There is an old Hispanic folklore that says that if you use baby urine on your skin, that it'll make your skin look really great. Not true. But the reason that it's there is because some people have taken this idea of urea and being an antimicrobial kind of to a really weird place. Yep.
Is that why, like, when you drink a lot in excess of alcohol, you can sort of smell it when you sweat because of
Smell
your
the
kidneys, like
smell the alcohol. Alcohol is liberated through the pores, but it's also just given off by your respiration. But mostly it's removed from the kidneys, right? The kidneys remove most of it. So, yeah, you can smell alcohol for sure, but I don't know that it's such a pungent smell that you can appreciate it from the skin. More it's going to be from the breath, right? So a lot of times the officers will shine a light on your face, and that can have an effect on the optics and how it affects your eyes if you're inebriated, right? Because of your pupils being dilated. And so therefore the brightness of the light really kind of can cause a little bit of,
Shocking.
yeah.
Mhm.
But most of the time the eyes, if a lot of light, the pupils will close real quickly, but for somebody that's inebriated, it stays dilated, and so it really hurts. Right? So it's one of the first signs of inebriation, right? That's why they make you mad by shining in your, if you just like, come on, dude.
I've never gotten in trouble when I was drunk.
So here, if we look at this, we're gonna start to talk about the infections that affect the skin. And we look at it, the term is usually cellulitis. We use that term to mean anything that can infect the skin. But I want you to know that the two most common etiologies of skin infections are our friend Staph aureus and our friend Streptococcus pyogenes, right? Oh my God, a gram-positive coccus is catalase positive, and a gram-positive coccus is catalase negative. You can appreciate now why we've done such a beautiful study of these organisms in the laboratory, because they themselves can infect every single tissue of the body. And so here we are, closing up the semester, beginning to look at how everything that we've done before relates to this very last unit, because everything we've done for has led us to the understanding how these organisms work in the body. So everything I've done before has given you a body of knowledge that now it really means a lot when you can talk about them and what they do to your body, because they do a lot of craziness to your body. Right? There is a method to every single thing I did. Right? And so you can appreciate that. Here we're looking at really the formation of a furnicle and a carbuncle. A furnicle, a lot of times we know is a boil. It can be very sensitive. A carbuncle, where a furnicle has one focus of infection, a carbuncle has multiple foci of infection. And so here you can see, this is a carbuncle, right? This is somebody's chin, probably some guy who nicked himself when he was shaving, and the organisms got into the skin, infected the hair follicles, and now you have this foil that is on that particular chin. Here's a better one where some of the skin has been removed, that's been hurt, and now you can see the three heads. You have to actually debride each one of those areas, because each one of those areas shows an infection. One's going this way, one's going that way, and one's going that way. And those heads are just showing where those infections are. You have to get rid of all three of them. You just cannot lance one of them. You have to do all three of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if not, it's just gonna come back raging. Yep.
When you say lance, do you mean like cut in and like scoop out?
That's exactly what I mean. The correct term is to debride. most people call it debride. I don't like to say debride, it sounds like a car to me, but it's debride means to just simply lance and remove all of the infected pus and things like that, right? You wanna get the core, but sometimes you can't get the core, but you have to get the core.
So a carbuncle will always have a 3.
No, it have multiple foci. It can have 10, it can have 12, but here it's just showing 3.
And we're talking boil, the word is multiple boils.
Boil can mean either thing. Usually it's a furnicle, because most people only have one focus of infection. But a carbuncle, if you called it a boil, I get why you would call it
A
that.
carbuncle is multiple furuncles or boils.
Or multiple heads.
Just call it multiple places where it's infected.
Okay.
Okay? Good? Why are you laughing, Miss Isabel?
Smiling.
So here is impetigo. Impetigo is a very common infection in little kiddos, and it is very contagious. So little kiddos a lot of times have this kind of runny type of impetigo. It becomes crusty over a period of time.
Is it the hands, foot,
And
mouth?
like what? No, hand, foot, and mouth is different. Hand, foot, and mouth is a viral infection, right? And you can't really do anything about that one. But this is Streptococcus pyogenes. And if it's only superficial, you can treat it with an ointment. But you can also take penicillin. The really good thing about staph or Streptococcus pyogenes is there's no drug resistance at all. It is sensitive to every single antibiotic we have. So we need to use penicillin for it because it'll knock it out. Where Staph aureus, you can't use penicillin anymore. It just doesn't work against it, right? So you can see these two different pathogens have taken a different route, right, in the way that they can be treated. And one of them is easily treated, the other one is much harder to treat. Therefore, if you think about it, MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, that one is resistant to all of the penicillin family. And therefore, it's much more a nosocomial infection than Strep pyogenes is, which we never talk about Streptococcus pyogenes as being a nosocomial pathogen, right? But it is a major pathogen. We just never talk about it as being nosocomial, because the organisms that survive in a hospital are those that are drug resistant, right? Because we're hitting people with antibiotics all the time. Okay? So this is folliculitis. This is a case study that I had to do to keep up my certifications in microbiology. And here was a young lady who was going to go on a cruise and went and got waxed. And the wax was contaminated with Staph aureus, and Staph aureus moved into the hair follicles and causes serious infection. Now, if it's treatable, it's superficial, right? It's very treatable with a topical, but her whole idea of looking good in a bikini while she was on a cruise, you're probably not going to wear a bikini if your skin looks like this, right? Because people will ask questions or be scared. Yeah.
So folliculitis, are you saying it's always S. aureus, or it could be?
It could be other organisms also, but the more common one is S. aureus.
Same thing for the impetigo with the aspergillus?
Yes,
Okay.
So if we think about folliculitis, it's really a pimple. It's really an infection of a hair follicle, and it's mostly Staph aureus. Okay. So this is necrotizing fasciitis. This young kiddo had an infection, and he looks this good now after 8 surgeries. They were able to stop the spread of necrotizing fasciitis, but then they had to do a lot of cosmetic surgery. This was the case study I had to do also to keep up my certification, and so they gave you the entire background. And he got a nick or something on his face, and it turned into necrotizing fasciitis, and within a few hours it had digested most of his face. And so they stopped the infection, they cut part of his tissue out to remove the infected parts, and they got it under control. And this is, after 8 surgeries, he looks this good. Now,
The foot is,
to a lot of people, they would be very afraid of this poor dude. And so they were going, I haven't kept up with it, but they were going to have surgeries to cosmetically add lips to him, which would be really cool. We can do that these days, right? We have stem cell things we can do and all kinds of different things. So I was really excited about that. But, you know, it became more dramatic at the very end because they were asking him in the case study, well, what's the one thing you hope for as a good outcome? He said that he hoped he looked good enough to one day have a girlfriend. That's all he said, right? So I don't know, years it took him to look this good, right? This is necrotizing fasciitis of the foot. You can see the necrotic tissue, right? Here's a Penrose stain, that's old school. Well, they want to put a Penrose drain in there to not allow the serosanguinous fluids to pool. Because if you allow those serosanguinous fluids to pool, you're just asking for another infection. Nowadays, they have these evac things, right? And so they can put these evacs in, and this little tubing is attached to a little pump, and you can just pump it up and remove all those serosanguinous fluids. That's a really great way to do it. It's a more expensive way to do it, but it's a great way to do it. Yep.
Is this what they were talking about, in the, like at the beaches and stuff a couple years ago?
That is necrotizing fasciitis, but that's a different organism. Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus pyogenes are the most common. The one that's at the beach is called Vibrio vulnificus, and it is a major flesh eater. But there's some other flesh eaters, right? Mycobacterium ulcerans is one that's usually associated with aquariums. And then there is also Clostridium perfringens, which causes gangrene. So those are all flesh eaters, okay?
So which organism is this?
This one is Streptococcus pyogenes, which is the most serious form of necrotizing fasciitis because it moves fast. The good thing about this, Isabella, is that it can be treated with penicillin. But you know, you're not going to use penicillin when this infection is raging. You're going to use something much stronger, like tipercillin, clavionic acid, something like that. You're going to pull out the big gun because you have to try to save the patient. You have to get the infection under control first before you start to treat. Yeah.
Could this be caused by any of our standard skin-based bacteria?
Yes, it could. So, I have, so you can see this person died. Here you can see how they removed all the tissue, and then they allowed it to start to heal, and then they sutured it all together. The skin is pretty elastic. They can pull on it. They can suture it back together.
Is that a knee?
When we,
Is that someone's knee?
part of the hip area, yeah. So, when we talk about gangrene, I'm going to show you other images of gangrenous tissue, and in that case, because the organisms that cause gangrene, Clostridium perfringens, is anaerobic, you have a lot of gas being produced. That's why it's called gas gangrene. Okay. So I had an episode of having to deal with necrotizing fasciitis, not on one human, but on my dog. So my dog and I were playing catch in the back, and I would throw the ball, and she would run full speed and pick up the ball. She would overrun the ball and then pick it up and bring it back to me. She could do that all day long. She loved to play. Well, she was doing it one time, and she snapped her ACL. And she was young enough at the time, she was 4 years old, that my wife and I decided to have surgery because we wanted to give her as normal a life as possible. Well, the veterinarian, when they're doing surgery, they have these warming plates, and the warming plate was too hot and it burned her. And we didn't know, although I saw a little, and I said, I think she's got a little bit of infection, the doc just called it a hot spot. Gave me spraying gentamicin on it, but it didn't work. So this was Thursday. Friday, my dog had labor breathing. She had a temperature, and she was very weak. So we rushed her to the all-night emergency veterinarian. And here's a picture of me and the vet looking at her, but I knew what it was. I shaved it first, and I put the pen mark with a Sharpie on it, and then the vet shaved the rest, but you could see where the infection was, right? So this is me and the vet dealing with her, right? She had a cone on because she wanted to lick everything. But you can see what happened. And the vet basically told me, we're gonna have to remove all the tissue. So they took her back and they gave her a local, but they started cutting into the tissue, and you could hear the dog screaming because the pain was still so intense. So they brought her back in, and she was kind of happy, to see us, but the vet said we need to keep her for 2 nights and give her intravenous antibiotics. What the vet was really telling me is she's probably not gonna make it, right? But my wife didn't know that, and she was already a hot mess because she was crying already. I wasn't gonna tell her that there's a good chance she's gonna die, because there's always a chance she would survive, and she did, right? So the vet showed me how to do the hydrotherapy, because they would do it, but they would charge me $80 every time they did it, and they would have had to be done 2 or 3 times a day. So we would do it at the house, and I had my wife videotape every time we did it over the next 4 months, because it took us 4 months to treat this dog so that she looked this good. Right, so here she is, kind of skinny, but getting better, you can see. But the tissue, the damage to the tissue had been done already. So she never grew hair back here like this, right? So when I would walk her at the park and the little kids would come up, they would all kind of, oh, what happened to her? And I'd tell her, I should always tell her, oh, she had a little infection. But I would know, I would go, well, she had a little bit of necrotising. And the mother would start screaming, ah! And she'd put them all in the car and they would leave, because, you know, they still think that you can get necrotizing fasciitis from a dog who had it at one time.
We had a dog that got into a rattlesnake den, and she got multiple bites on her chest, and she survived it, but, you know, the rattlesnake venom kind of eats away at the tissue, and she got necrotizing fasciitis from it, and we had to do the same stuff, and like one of us was always home with her, and we had to do the stuff with her, and we would have to take her into the vet every other day for them to check the progress of it. The vet was 5 minutes up the road for us, and I mean, she didn't live very long because of another issue, but I mean, it takes a lot of care to get that under control. 'Cause she didn't
If you
stay-
do it, it's doable, but if they do it, it's a lot of money.
Yeah,
So
that's-
you know, when we first started, when we brought her home, we were using the Attends, and we would use duct tape to wrap the Attends over her so that, but then that wouldn't work because it got too hot and she got a yeast infection. I told her that she's got a yeast infection, and the vet said, no, she doesn't. I'm like, yeah, she does.
So we
The
didn't even
vet-
try to
I finally
find it.
fired that dude. But I went to Walmart and I bought the superficial, the Tinactin stuff, and I put it on and I got rid of her. I also had another vet write me a open prescription for Silvadine, and I would take that. And we decided that the Attends wasn't gonna work, so what we did was we would buy the large Tefla. Right, you know what I'm talking about when I say Tefla? I know he does, I know she does. So Tefla has this coating that doesn't stick to the wounds itself, and I would coat that Tefla with Silvadine, and it would match up. My wife developed, and I told her she needed to patent it, but she made this little coat that we could put on her and tie it up, and the Tefla would be right. So she wore this thing when she was around, because dogs like to roll around.
Yeah.
and-
That's actually what our vet told us to do, and we did it. We just kept, like, we all went through our closets and got really big T-shirts, and we would just put them on her. And I think I have pictures of her like walking around the house with that.
Yeah.
She ended up passing from a tumor, but it healed great. I mean, as long as you care for it, they do heal really great.
So this dog is my favorite of all time, and she was great. She was 62-pound Pitty, and she thought she was a lap dog. So you'd be sitting on the couch, and she'd jump up there and sit in your lap, and then lean on you like this, like, you know, give me some love. But she lived, after she healed, she lived another 8 years, and she also died of cancer. And had completely just
She had labs in
metastasized.
her.
She was a mutt of some sort, but mostly Pitty.
Ours was a yellow lab.
Yeah. So after 6 months, this is how it looked like. And so, but she was a great dog. This is erysipelas that mostly affects elderly individuals, right? And so you can see the etiology is Streptococcus pyogenes. You can see how important Staphylococcus aureus and Streptococcus pyogenes are, right? They are huge pathogens of the skin, but they can infect every single tissue of the body. And so we continue to talk about these organisms even this day. So here you can see cellulitis and how erysipelas is more superficial, and then abscesses, and how a lot of serous sanguineous fluid and pus develop around it. We now move to talk about anthrax, and we're going to talk about the 3 different manifestations of anthrax. Because if we think about that for just a minute, anthrax can present itself lots of different ways. And so instead of talking about cutaneous anthrax now, and then coming back and talking about respiratory anthrax later. I'm just gonna present anthrax to you now, and we're just not gonna cover it in the respiratory when we get there, right? There's a lot of other things we need to talk about when we get to respiratory infections. So anthrax itself can present itself 3 different ways. It's cutaneous, it's pulmonary, and it has been reported as causing lesions in the GI tract. But when it caused lesions in the GI tract, it was only associated with countries that there was famine and the people didn't have anything to eat, so they were eating carrion. Does everybody know what I mean by that? What does that mean? They were eating roadkill. So, and the roadkill themselves had the endospores to Bacillus anthracis, and so they developed lesions in the GI tract, right? One of the more common ways, although it's not very common, is to have cutaneous anthrax, right? And so a lot of times it's associated with people who are working with animals. And so here you can see is the edema, the swelling, and the erythema, redness, are surrounding that necrotic center, that pustule, right? And so it can present itself lots of different ways, but it's really associated with people who work with livestock or veterinarians, right? Some of those individuals actually get vaccinations against anthrax because they're going to be associated with it all the time. If you have any kind of livestock, chickens, goats, whatever, the Bacillus anthracis endospores are in the environment, yet you almost never hear about it.
You know, when we learn about this stuff, it makes me feel ignorant to a lot of things. Because like anthrax, when you think about it, you think, well, not all the time, but about what happened back in 2001. And then, like, you don't really realize that this kind of stuff is a bacteria. It's not a man-made chemical, like, it's a bacteria.
Although
that,
there are some bioweapons that
Yes.
are anthrax, and they've taken and given it a lot of
Yeah.
virulence factor.
but like this kind of stuff, like, it's just a
Normal.
natural
Normal.
bacteria, and it
And
kinda,
it is not the normal stuff that you find on the ground, not resistant to anything, you knock it out with penicillin.
Mhm.
The ones that have been weaponized, Cipro is the only thing that takes it out. Yes, ma'am?
So, the etiology of
Mhm.
this would be Bacillus anthracis
Correct.
or anthrax?
No, Bacillus anthracis. Anthrax is the infection. Okay, good. So the more lethal form of anthrax is pulmonary anthrax, and so here you can see the infiltration of the lungs. Usually, if you take a radiograph of the lungs appear really dark because healthy lungs look really black. Here you can see it's completely infiltrated. This used to be called Wolsorter's disease because when people would shear sheep, right, try to say that if you're Hispanic, if you shear the sheep, a lot of times a lot of dust would be formed and people would breathe the dust in and the endospores would be in the dust and they would develop pulmonary anthrax. Yeah,
How do you differentiate it with histoplasmosis?
very different. The anthrax grows a lot quicker. Histoplasma takes a long time to develop, right? So yeah, they're very different etiologies completely. I wouldn't prefer to have an infection by either one. But if I had to have one, it'd be histoplasma. I don't want to have pulmonary anthrax. And I don't want to have the weaponized form, because the weaponized form is only treatable by a fluoroquinolone. I don't know if you remember, after 9/11, ciprofloxacin could not be found because the people bought them in huge volume. They bought all of the drug up because they thought there was going to be a massive explosion of infection because there were already 9 cases, right? I think, I don't know how many deaths, a few. There were already 9
The
cases in a
anthrax?
few, during, after
7.
9/11. 7 cases?
it was 7, I think it was 7 cases and 3 people died.
That's, I'll go with that.
I did the.
Oh, okay. So, people bought up all the Cipro and were gonna make a big buck out of it, right? They were gonna sell it at 3 times what they bought it for, right? Thank God it didn't become a deal, right? But what they were doing with the normal anthrax is that they were putting it in talcum. And then they would sprinkle the talcum on the envelopes that they send to a lot of the political people up in DC. And the people pick it up and all the talcum would go all over the place. And then I don't think one political person got sick.
It was all the postal workers.
It was all the other postal workers.
I was wrong, it was 5 people and 17 hospitalized.
But it's just amazing how people think about how they can be mean to each other. I don't get it, right? Oh, and by the way, do you know where that anthrax strain was? Because we did molecular science to figure out where it came from. Huh?
Did it come from Asia?
Are you asking me like who was behind it?
No,
The military.
we still don't know who was behind it.
Well, they say that they made an arrest, and it was the, I can tell you exactly
It was a
what his name
scientist.
was in the military.
Yeah, in the FBI, but to this day, he said he didn't do it, and his career was ruined, and so
Dr. Bruce Ivan.
he committed suicide while incarcerated.
Yeah, before he could be tried, Ivans took his own life.
Because it doesn't make sense that he did it.
Well, because he works in the biodefense lab, why
Yeah.
would he go against his own people?
Exactly.
To
So
release that.
it doesn't make sense that he did it. We think it came from a culture that was supposed to be destroyed at a university, and somebody took the culture.
They just
before
couldn't
got
trace it
destroyed.
back to any specific person, except for this guy, he's one of the guys that had it.
But it was all
Is
circumstantial.
this the one
The
of
news
the
is messed
letters?
up because they kept
to,
saying,
like-
oh, it
Yeah,
came from
it
China.
was- it happened,
They sent
like,
it
right
over
after
from-
9/11.
They were picking up people's random addresses and just sending it out. They were scaring everybody. That's
Shut
horrible.
down the offices and stuff.
They had to shut down, they spent like millions, almost billions of dollars shutting down the postal service to,
Oh, that's right.
contain it, to
Decontaminate.
clean everything, yeah, that's where it is.
Yep.
You said the histoplasma version of this.
No,
right?
mm-mm.
Say it again?
Histoplasma is a fungus.
Okay,
She brought that one up.
okay.
She
Okay.
said, oh, well, I don't remember what the question was in there more.
Like, how do you differentiate?
How do you differentiate? So you could do
Have
testing for it.
congressional-
Cut out histoplasma, that's not related to this at all.
Okay,
Okay.
so there wasn't a question about like which version of this is worse, like the respiratory or the
Yes,
skin?
and the respiratory is much worse.
And that's when you definitely wouldn't wanna get, and you have to treat that with the quinolone therapy.
Correct.
Okay.
And the quinolone therapy is only for the bioweapon,
Oh, okay.
okay? Because most of the normal Bacillus anthracis strains, Samantha, can be treated with penicillin. There is no resistance.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, see there, penicillin is a drug of choice. No resistance.
What did they have on that Dr. Bruce guy that they thought they?
Circumstantial
Just that it was
evidence,
in that lab they were working.
the strain that he was working with was the one that they found.
That's it.
And it was like, he was close to New Jersey, and that's where these letters were mailed from, and it was all stupid, like.
There
it
was no real evidence,
No
but,
manifestos or anything.
but they,
like that.
no, but they had to charge somebody because the
And
American.
charges didn't happen till like '09, right?
I know, the American population was scared, and we had to charge somebody so people would feel like, okay, we got it under control. Right? So,
So scary.
Yeah, no, first time.
not the first one.
Alright.
We move over to Hansen's disease, leprosy. So leprosy is kind of an interesting infectious agent. It likes to infect the parts of the body that are cooler than body temperature. Hands, toes, knees, nose, ears, that kind. Now it can be found anywhere, but it prefers those parts of the body that are cooler than body temperature because it doesn't live very well at 98.6, right? It doesn't do. And the other thing is, where leprosy can present itself lots of different ways. This is very, very deforming right here. But you can have this, like this raised rash, but it can be also causing so much tissue damage because the cell-mediated immune response is what causes most of the damage. It attacks the organism, but the organism, in attacking the organism, it destroys all the tissues. And so you can have complete denuding of the actual appendages of the body. And so therefore you lose them. They either degrade or they get surgically removed, right? The interesting thing about leprosy, Mycobacterium leprae, it's real closely related to Mycobacterium tuberculosis. But it has about a generation period of 12 days. So one cell becomes two in 12 days, a real slow grower. And it has an incubation period. The CDC has said that it can be up to 40 years. Now, how do we know that? Well, because young people were in the military or they were in the Peace Corps and they were around the areas where leprosy is more endemic, and then they came back to the States but lived in places where there was no leprosy, but developed leprosy in their 50s, right? So how do you explain that? Right? There is a vaccine against tuberculosis. It's known as the BCG, the Bacillus calmette-guerin, that can be given to people who live in places where leprosy is endemic. And it has some protection against leprosy because Mycobacterium tuberculosis and Mycobacterium leprosy are very close in the different types of proteins that they have. And so it has some protection. We can say that leprosy is endemic to Central Texas, and in Texas really, because of the armadillo. The armadillo is a natural reservoir for it. But we're not gonna ever give the BCG in the United States. Why?
Because it ruins our testing.
It ruins our testing. So that is excellent work, Miss Samantha. So if we were to give the BCG to everybody, Mexico does. If we give the BCG to everybody would test positive for the tuberculin skin test. And we would have to use other methods, titers or x-rays to make sure that people don't, and that's just too expensive. So we don't give the BCG, plus our levels of tuberculosis are pretty small.
Do you think that the oils they used to use back then, helped it, or?
The oils,
The-
you mean thieves
the-
oil, things like that?
The what's it called? I don't know how to.
The
pronounce
thieves
it.
oil.
I think that was what it is now.
So the thieves oil was used mostly to protect against plague. But I don't see why that stuff wouldn't work on these things also.
They used it for hundreds of thousands of years. It was just one of those natural.
It's one of those
things that
Asian traditions,
uses
right?
for everything.
Yep.
And plague is still around,
Uh-huh.
but it's just more easily treatable now.
No, it's hard to treat. But it's just not as transmittable because typically you can get plague, bubonic or pneumonic plague, Yersinia pestis, from somebody who is infected pneumonically with the lungs and they're shedding it when they cough or sneeze. But the more common way to get it is from a bite of a flea that has actually been on infected rats or infected squirrels. That's why you should never touch squirrels.
But we don't see it a lot now because.
2 cases in Texas, west of I-35, usually in West Texas. That's where we see it. There has been a case of plague as near as Wimberley.
Why don't we see it as much anymore?
We just don't get near the reservoirs as much as we used to.
I don't understand.
We don't hang out with squirrels or rats very often anymore.
Okay.
We're not in close quarters with them like they used to be back in the day, like the ships.
I'll talk about plague when we talk about systemic infections, I promise.
Okay,
And-
I just feel like I need to redo my papers.
No,
My
turn it-
Candida albicans says
Sure,
that,
no,
like that they're.
no, these are your empirical thoughts. There's nothing wrong with the way you think about things.
Okay, I hope so, because Candida albicans is like deathly in my paper.
It's
to
not,
certain
it's not lethal,
populations.
but don't redo your
Okay.
paper.
Alright,
That's the information you found,
yeah,
okay?
one thing. to
I'm
do.
interested in your thoughts, and when you write this paper, and when you take, and you hear my last lectures, you might change your mind about some things. What's wrong with becoming a little more educated?
Roger that.
You had one position, and now you have a different one. Or maybe not. Yep.
There's still to urban areas where they have tons of mice and rats. It's disgusting.
It's really interesting, like New York, right?
Right.
Oh my God, there's so many rats in New York.
Yes.
There are 2 populations and they don't mix. Why don't they mix? Why is there an upstate New York rat and a downstate New York rat? Why are there 2 different colonies of rats and they never mix. What is the deal? We gotta figure it out. We gotta kill them first, right? We need to start eating rats.
You know, I read that if
It's
we-
good, it's like chicken.
if there was an apocalypse and all people were gone, or like 99.9% of the population, that rats would die.
Rats would die.
And roaches would not outlive us.
Roaches would outlive us.
They said no.
They
Like
would.
big cities, they wouldn't. The ones that are accustomed to being like in homes and cities and things would die.
Roaches
But-
are the perfect evolved insect.
They can eat cardboard, like, they just take
They
over
will
my
eat
house.
anything.
They're actually
They-
I have an exterminator now, but they were coming out of the craziest places.
Yeah, they say that the ones, unless they're already like in the country wild, that they will die because they rely too much on humans.
That is true, but you know, they can eat debris.
Yes.
And for a long time, there'll be a lot of human remains to eat.
Oh, yeah.
So they'll figure out a way.
Can I make them wanna live to be alive?
Can they survive a nuclear bomb?
Can you what?
Can they survive a nuclear bomb?
No,
That's a good
not,
question.
nothing will survive a nuke within a, I don't know, 30-mile radius.
Okay.
So the people who are where it got nuked are gonna be incinerated right away. But the out are all gonna have problems with radiation. And depending on which way the wind is blowing. That's why Russia won't probably nuke Ukraine, because all the radiation is gonna come back on them because of the prevailing winds and the way they come off of the ocean.
Thank God.
They'd be really silly if they did that.
I don't know, I feel like he's sick. And I feel like he's just being like,
Putin?
yeah, I feel like
No,
he's being,
Putin's power hungry.
but have you seen his hands?
Oh, no, he is sick.
Yeah, he's got something.
He's got thyroid issues.
Yeah, he is something. I feel like he's just gonna be like, oh, everyone will die. Like, yeah. He's just,
I don't know how you all put up with him in Poland so many years. I just don't know.
He bullies us.
I know, he bullies everybody, except not Ukraine. Ukraine said,
Oh my God, talk about an underdog story. That made me so happy.
And the people, what's the country, Norway? Is it Norway? What's the
No.
country that borders them?
Finland.
Finland? They already told them, if you come in here, we're gonna give you hell.
Yeah, they have before.
Although St. Petersburg used to be part of Finland, and Russia took it from them before, you know?
Really? I didn't know that. It's gorgeous.
And then there's Kaliningrad, right? Which we're getting into history, we need to stop, right?
Yeah.
Because we'll go on forever, because I have a lot to say about that. Okay, so why in the world, now we're gonna talk about intoxications. Why in the world is this little thing there? Yeah.
Because they can cause toxic shock syndrome, which
It-
is quite devastating.
Yeah. So when you buy your tampons, ladies, Eric, I don't think you'll ever buy one, although they're really good absorbent pads. If you have deep wounds, they work really well.
Right.
I know because of my dog, right? We figured it out. We can use tampons.
My husband gets nosebleeds.
Yeah, put it in there. Right? They work really great. But, so, in the early 1990s, I think, there were 3 young ladies in the Midwest who were not using tampons correctly. They were leaving them for days.
Oh my God.
And they
Oh,
developed toxic shock syndrome. Toxic shock syndrome is caused by, guess what? Staph aureus and Streptococcus pyogenes. They produce these toxins, and the toxins can have a really bad effect. Look at everything they do. Amazing, right? High fever, bite chills, malaise, nausea. You have a diffuse rash, redness of the eyes, confusion, seizures, headaches, muscle aches, hypotension, and eventually your kidneys and your liver start to fail. And depending on which one fails first, the other one follows. And if the kidneys go and then the liver follows, or the liver goes and the kidneys follow, that's multiple organ dysfunction syndrome, and you won't die. There's nothing we can do.
Like, you don't even have to leave it in that long. You really
Yeah,
don't.
I was
Just like a
gonna
couple
say, like,
hours.
even overnight, you're
Yeah.
not supposed to
No,
have
don't
a
do it.
tampon in overnight.
Don't do
Tell you to
it.
wash your
It's
hands
not worth
before
it.
you do it.
So on the box, of course, it has the warning, and I haven't read it in a while because it looks really funny when a male is in the feminine hygiene area reading the box. So one time I just took a picture, and, you know, because I wanted to read it. Yeah.
Do you know if that's associated only with tampons and if like the little diva cups they have now is like
The moon cups, I've never heard of it being associated with the moon cup. I have not. But I don't know a lot about the moon cup at
So
all.
is
It
it like
can really be
cotton?
associated with anything
Okay, so the
if your
cotton's
hands
bleached.
are.
Yeah, okay, I
You're putting
just
bleach-
figured this out,
Yeah, you're
like
putting
last
bleach up
month.
there, yeah.
So you get organic.
So
get organic.
these cups,
Organic.
I'm gonna come to mind because of
Yeah.
what I just read.
She's
About-
read a lot lately, I
about-
think.
About Candida albicans.
Yeah.
So they get these biofilm, these little, the medical devices, and people get biofilm layers on them, and then it's
Agreed.
Candida albicans. So it makes sense that by that logic and understanding that the diva cups being left in too long could create about a biofilm, and you could
They're
get.
called diva cups now.
Yeah.
I've heard them called moon cups. I've never heard them called diva cups.
But
okay.
it makes sense that if you left them in for too long, and then
Yeah.
how long is too long, because we're still kind of experimenting with these things,
Mm-mm.
they might create a thrush or an overgrowth environment.
So,
in your-
somebody help me understand the bleach thing. What was that?
Okay,
Say
so
that
tampons were created, tampons and pads were meant for women, but they were created by men. And men's whatever minds, they were like, okay, well, let's help, try to keep it clean. They literally use bleached fibers, like, it's been known, like, they've just switched over within the last 2 years. They've been using bleached fibers and telling women it's okay to put that in there.
But bleach fibers are no longer have sodium hypochlorite because sodium hypochlorite is very volatile. It doesn't stay there very long.
That's what's been going on.
So a lot of things are
It's
bleached,
separated.
right?
If you go to
Cotton is
tampons,
bleached, because
it's
cotton
separated.
kind of has a tannish look to it. But people think that if you use cotton that's tannish, that it's dirty. So they bleach the cotton. But the bleach doesn't stay on the cotton very long because it's very volatile. So I thought somebody was putting bleach up into the vagina, and that would really scare me for a minute. I'm like, what was that? I had to figure out what was going on.
No, like honestly, I think there's just no regulation about like the amount
Yeah,
of bleach
I
that's
think
in the
that's
fiber.
what
There's
it
no
is. It's
regulation.
like
We
it's-
don't know. There's no drug facts on the back. We just know that it's
There's
bleached cotton.
actually like a long list of ingredients on tampons.
Yeah,
like
they just
a
don't put it on the
long,
box.
long one.
They don't put it on the box.
I-
So like
It
now
really
it's
should just be
become
hot.
Is there, so, just to educate me, because I don't know what the hell's going on. What would you all recommend then if you can't use tampons? Pads.
Pads, organic pads.
or the Ziva cups or like 100% organic tampons.
Or
Yes.
now
without all of the
I-
chemicals.
The cotton
You do
company
not need to
actually
have
makes
chemicals
tampons.
in
Now they
tampons.
make like underwear that
Oh,
have
yeah,
like
those are cool.
extra, yeah, and it's.
But if you
Just
are a
wash your
heavy
hands.
flower, I don't know that,
There
I don't know that
that's
that.
I could
the
speak
way
on
they
that
make
before,
those
like, you're gonna need a combination.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Okay, hold on. Hold on. I really want to learn about this, so I'm asking the
What about
question
the
because
bears
I am
and sharks?
completely ignorant.
You can use
So-
a reusable pad, or you can get these panties now that have a pad built into them.
And you
And
just
they
say
have layers of very tightly woven something or others layered upon each other, and then a charcoal
And they can be
absorption.
completely washed.
They
Yeah.
can be completely washed.
They're awesome, bro.
It's
So would
amazing.
you use hydrogen peroxide to wash them?
No, you just
I just soak them in hot water with some laundry detergent, and then I wash them with my regular clothes.
They go in a separate.
Yeah, I was about to say, I just said
I
that.
should use hydrogen peroxide.
Now that we know about hydrogen
Study that was on like
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago that studied different brands and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So like I think I have them in my bag, but like Tampax brand or something. And then they studied those, they studied like all the popular ones, and then they also went to like Target and like Home Depot and got like the organic whatever ones, and they were all exactly the same. They like the pads, the tampons that were labeled organic, non-100% cotton, they were exactly the same and stuff like that. But you know how that goes. So I don't. It to me like that. Just wash your hands and be clean about it, and you'll be fine. Because where do these bacteria come from? Your environment. So if you're touching stuff and then you go to the bathroom and you take care of yourself and you don't wash your hands, like I know like when it's my time of the month I keep hand sanitizer. The only time I use hand sanitizer is.
But that's mostly for viruses,
And
not
then-
bacteria.
Yes, but I try to keep clean about it, and if I I don't know, I've never had toxic shock syndrome, but I know it's a OBGYN, I can't remember her name. She was in, South Boston somewhere, and she was part of a trial that, ran tests, or not a trial, I guess a clinic, I don't know what you would call it, an experiment, that ran, they had like 20 different brands of tampons and pads separately. And they did all this testing on them, and they were all exactly minus one or two.
So Eric, did you learn something?
Yeah, well, my neighbor, when I was a teenager, my neighbor died of toxic shock syndrome. We had no freaking clue what that was. This was like 85, 86. And she had been a camp counselor like in Montana, North Dakota. Got sick, came back, got sicker. Unresponsive, septic. They had to Starfighter from Tallahassee to Gainesville, Shands, and she died.
Yeah. So my really, here's a true story. When I was a young whippersnapper, I was working for a doctor who practices internal medicine. Really great doc, Dr. Stroud, Dr. Frierson Stroud. I think she's retired now. But we had a 14-year-old girl come in with the mama.
Did she have
And the
two
mama,
tampons
huh?
in?
What?
Did she have 2 tampons in?
No.
Oh.
So the mama brought her in. She was not undergoing menences yet. She came in with the mama. The mama said, I think she's got a little bit of a urinary tract infection. Can you give us antibiotics and we'll be on our way? I took her history and I took her blood pressure and she was orthostatic. I said, oh no, this is not a urinary tract infection.
It's when your blood pressure changes at a high level from sitting down to standing up. It's not supposed to go past 20. If it
So
goes
I
past
was
20.
astute enough to do that, right? So I did that and I said, oh no, this is not a urinary tract infection. I called the doc and I said, I have a young girl who has fever and who is orthostatic. And she said, okay, let me go in there and look at it. And the doc got out of the little girl that she had been on a camping trip with her father and she had got stuck by a stick in the lake. Of course, I was not gonna ask the young lady to pull down her underwear without females in the room.
Yeah.
Right? But the doc and the mama were in there and the little girl pulled it and it was a raging infection. And the doc told the mama, I think we need to take her to the emergency room because I think she's in the early stages of toxic shock, not related to any tampon at all. Right? The mother said, no.
Bless you.
She has a little bit of a urinary tract infection. Last time this happened, you gave us amoxicillin, give us amoxicillin, and we'll be on the way. And the doc said, absolutely not. I said, I'm not gonna do that. I said, but I'll tell you what, if you will call your primary care physician, and if he or she says that I can release her on their recommendation, I'll do that. So the mama called the doc talked to the doc, and then the primary care talked to the mama and told the mama, there's an ambulance on the way, because I had already called the ambulance. There's an ambulance on the way, I will meet you at the emergency room. The little girl went into a coma for 2 weeks with toxic shock, but she survived. And then months later, she came in and brought a little cake for us to thank us. She did that on her own. The mama didn't have anything to do with it. But what she did tell us was something that we didn't know before, is the mama was gonna have a party that night.
Oh my God.
And she was busy getting ready for the party and really didn't care about the little girl because she wanted the party to be a success.
I will never understand medical negligence because of a parent. I almost did not go to the emergency room when my appendix ruptured because my mom didn't have insurance and didn't want to pay for it. And she told me I was having a miscarriage.
I almost died because my mom, seriously, they were like, if you had brought her in a day later, she'd be dead.
I will
Because I
never
was
understand.
vomiting, I had diarrhea, extreme.
So there
fever,
are a lot of
bad.
pressures on
There
parents.
was.
But this was not one of them, right? I mean, if the doc says, I think your child, outside, not with the kid, so the kid can't get scared, but outside, I think your child is in the early stages of toxic shock. I think we need to rush her to the hospital. And she said,
Yeah, we'll just take an antibiotic and be on our
Yeah.
way.
So that's a true story.
And she saw like the lesion and the infection and she was like, no, it's
It was a urinary tract infection.
Yeah.
Mostly because the mother and the father were in the middle of a divorce, and they couldn't figure out who was gonna get custody. I sure hope the father got custody, because he sounded like a great guy.
It was in
Nowadays,
Texas.
CPS would get involved in something like that.
Was it in Texas?
But-
Yeah.
Then the mother got.
It was around the far west area. That's where
Got
that,
custody then.
you know, that population over there is very wealthy, right?
Yeah.
See, that just blows my mind. I'll never understand
So-
parental medical negligence like that.
So,
Like,
Yeah.
so this is essentially toxic shock syndrome, can come from like a lesion or just anything, as long as it's the toxins produced by
Right.
S. oils.
There you go, you
Okay.
got it. Here's another one, scalded skin syndrome. So this is usually following about strep throat. Now, I will tell you that we have less of problems with scarlet fever, because nowadays when people get strep throat, they go get checked out and they get penicillin and it wipes it out. But there's some serious sequelae that can be associated with Streptococcus pyogenes, and we're gonna be talking about this when we talk about the respiratory infections when we come back from Thanksgiving. But one of them is, of course, scarlet fever, and this is a sandpaper rash, you know, it looks diffused, but the strawberry tongue, so some of the symptomology that we're talking about here, sandpaper rash and strawberry tongue, you'll have to be able to see it, because I'm gonna ask it to you. If a person, a child presents themselves with skin paper rash and strawberry tongue, what infectious agent or do you think is a culprit, right? And so these are gonna be kind of easy questions for you to really appreciate, because now you're listening to these lectures, right? And almost all of my infectious disease lectures are on my website. So if you were to miss, I'm a little bit worried about Jessica, she's missed twice, I don't know what's going on. She's okay? Okay. But, you know, as we're getting to end, if you wanna re-listen to something. Now, every single environment that I give a lecture in is a little bit different, right? And those were online, so, you know, you don't get the interaction of people. Sometimes you do, but mostly online you don't, because they just are watching reruns of The Bachelor instead of listening to it, you know, whatever. But I just keep talking, Isabella, okay? So scarlet fever, diffuse rash, sometimes you can have complete destruction of the outer layers of the skin. So you have these huge exfoliations that occur. And so you can see that this really should be treated like a burn. So you want to cut off that skin and not pull it off, because there is tissue that hasn't completely healed underneath that skin there. We do not see as many cases of scarlet fever anymore, where it used to be a really big deal in the 1900s, right? It would kill kids all the time. We don't see that anymore. Sir?
Is there any sort of vaccination for it or anything, or why don't we see it?
Because we get treated, so this
Quicker.
usually happens as a sequelae. Sequelae means what comes after.
Okay.
They used to get strep throat,
Right.
they wouldn't get treated, the toxins would form, they would affect the skin, and then you would have a secondary
Gotcha.
problem.
So since we treat the strep throat, we don't see that.
Correct. Okay? All right, now we're moving to the eye. So this is conjunctivitis. Guess what the number one cause of conjunctivitis is? There it is right there.
That's right.
Oh my God, this staph and strep guys, they're everywhere, Tram.
Where does that theory that you fart on someone's pillow and that?
Who knows? That's just silly. That is just silly.
I watched Knocked Up last night and they all got pink eye from farting on each other's pillows. And me and my boyfriend just dying laughing. And I'm like, that's actually not how you get pink eye. He's
Yeah.
like, get out of here. I'm like, yeah, you
So,
don't get it that way.
I got pink eye one time because I was watching a ball game and I had cedar fever, and I was mad at the team, and then they did something stupid and I said, ah, and I blew my nose at the same time and it went up in my eyes. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get pink eye. Sure enough I did. But the other time, I used to be a camp counselor for Episcopalian church when I was growing up, and I noticed that we were, you know, at camp in the summer, and there was all these people, and we were sharing in the grape juice, the blood of Christ. And little Johnny was over there, and he was kind of a pig, and he went like this, and he touched his eyeballs. We had pink eye to the goblet. I'm like, oh, hell no. So,
Throw it away.
as it came around, the priest was giving to me, I'll pass. The priest was puzzled, but he went on. And then later he pulled me aside and said, why didn't you participate in the blood of Christ? I'm like, because little Johnny's got pink eye, and he touched it to his eyes, and people are gonna get pink eye. 8 people got pink eye that week. Because it's little Johnny.
What's the second one? It's C.
Chlamydia trachomatis.
So
That's chlamydia.
Trichomonas? The same, you could say the
Same sexually transmitted.
Why is the wording different?
Which one?
Like trachomatis is different from trichomonas.
No, 2 different things.
Oh.
Chlamydia is C. Trachomatis is this species name. Trichomonas vaginalis. That's a different organism. Chlamydia trachomatis causes a sexually transmitted infection called chlamydia, but it also causes conjunctivitis.
Okay.
I'll let you decide how it might have gotten to the eyes.
Oh. Oh, man, come on.
I'm just saying. Now, Tram, you didn't get me on that part, did you? Oh my God.
I'll move it.
Don't put that on the web, it's X-rated.
So I learned on TikTok, you're like, why are you learning on there? Okay, but this girl, she's like the health lady person, whatever, I don't know what it is. But she said that like if like a guy's stuff were like to enter your eyeball, you could get like an STI because of that. And it's,
Well, it
yeah.
could, but the guy has to have the sexually transmitted infection.
Yeah.
To-
So
Yes, it could.
she's like, beware ladies, don't let your guy friend do that.
Yeah.
In your eyeball.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Unless he gets tested first, right? Then you know what you're dealing with. Which is really the take-home moment here is, you know.
Get tested.
Tram, this is going nowhere, buddy. I mean, we gotta stop now. Okay, let's go. Look at Samantha's even embarrassed. Oh my God.
No, I'm loving it.
Okay. So, okay, talking about sexually transmitted infections, this is Neisseria gonorrhea, right? So a lot of times when babies are born, they'll put erythromycin ophthalmic solution or ointment in the eyes. Some people use silver nitrate, and that's to protect the baby's eyes from potential infectious agents that they can get coming out of the birth canal. So here you can see this is an infection by Neisseria gonorrhea. This is eyes that are completely digested by a sexually transmitted infection. The baby will never have eyes. It's been digested, destroyed by Neisseria gonorrhea. But
So if
Staph
you
aureus
put
can
that
do.
on a blood plate, it would just eat it up.
No, Neisseria gonorrhea will not grow on a blood plate. It will only grow on a chocolate agar plate.
So it needs more nutrients.
It needs the heme from blood.
So with regular prenatal care, would they be doing
Yes,
routine
so
testing?
regular prenatal care, they should be testing for the big 3. The big 3 are gonorrhea, herpes, and chlamydia. Right? We're not really worried about syphilis, it's kind of rare. But the big 3, you need to be looking for those. And if we have those, the other thing they check for is group B strep, right? Because group B strep can cause problems. We'll talk about that when we talk about reproductive and sexually transmitted infections. But for the most part, you know, I'm a guy, so ladies, take it with a grain of salt. But to me, I think that birth should be vaginally. And the reason I believe that is because coming out of the birth canal, the baby not only gets life, but they get their first organisms that colonize their body. And the organisms that are in the vagina are much more protective than the organisms that babies would get if they're delivered by cesarean. If they get delivered by cesarean, the organisms that will colonize their body are going to be environmental strains of organisms by which the doctor or the nurses or whoever picked up when they were in that particular room. And they're always going to be bacillus and other organisms like that. But if they're coming out of the birth canal, they get all that protection of that. Now, there are cases when cesareans are absolutely necessary. But I believe that many physicians kind of schedule cesareans around their schedule, right? So, and so I don't really like that, but I get it, right?
Well, they make you scared to have a baby these days, that's the problem.
Yeah.
And
But-
unless you do your own research.
But there have been studies done by this. HHMI put out a really great video about what happens when a baby gets delivered vaginally or when a baby gets delivered through cesarean, and the organisms that colonize. The individuals, the babies who are born vaginally are much more protected than the ones that were delivered cesarean. That doesn't mean that the babies that were delivered cesarean are gonna get serious disease. That doesn't mean that. I'm just saying that the organisms that actually colonize the infant when they're coming out of the birth canal are much more conducive to good health than the ones that are environmental. Yep.
I was just curious about that, because I read about that in a book called like The Human Biome, and I would think that the environment within the vagina is substantially different than that of the skin.
Correct.
But yet, can some of those bacteria survive in the skin?
Yes,
Okay.
but they're even more different than the ones that are on the tabletop or the ones that are on the sterile packs of DNC or whatever
Okay.
they're carrying in. I've all got different things, and so all
Right.
those things are on the nurses and are on the physicians.
So founder effect, bingo, right off the bat.
Well, founder effect is a little bit different, right?
Okay.
So founder effect really is talking about genetics and the isolation of the population, right? And so Amish have 6 digits and things like that, right?
I
All
thought it
due
had
to
more to
founder
do with
effect.
what an organism was first into an environment and then
I'm not familiar with that version of founder effect,
Okay.
but mostly it's about genetics to me.
I think that you'd be happy to know that the way you see that is becoming more common.
I've been looking at that and listen, ladies, I'm a dude. I have no right to tell you what you should do with your body.
But that you're not telling us, you're
Right.
just informing us of the reasoning behind it. And I know, like, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I went to the birthing center here in Austin, Alcoa Buchanan. Wonderful place, and they are the type of place that inform you of every decision that you have and every right you have to those decisions.
Like,
And they told us, or they told me and my husband that, like, what you just said about how it's more beneficial to the baby to do vaginal. And I know, like, when I told people, like, they would ask me, I was like 38 weeks, and they were like, oh, when are you gonna have that baby? When is it scheduled? I was like, I'm not scheduling it. I went 2 weeks over my due date because I don't believe in the fact that doctors make you say, oh, 39 weeks, let's go have a baby, and that's not right. That's not right, because if you look at it in, like, scientifically, you're supposed to carry a baby for 42 weeks. That is
But there's
full term.
there's a difference between scheduling and giving you medication to induce.
Yes.
You're still delivering vaginally.
Yes, but they want you to,
Right.
9 times out of 10, they want you to have the baby at 39 weeks, 38 weeks, and like all of my friends, that's what they did.
Because the baby can get too big,
Yes, my baby was
and then it's
huge,
got to be delivered cesarean.
But like I was shocked by the amount of people that were like almost offended by my decision to not
Because
schedule
they
to
don't
have
understand.
my baby.
I'm only talking science. I'm not talking. I've built this opinion based on the scientific literature that's out there. And
Well, and
but
that's what I
again,
was
I'm a
getting to
male,
was that-
and males shouldn't really tell females what they should do with their bodies.
But like the medical industry has made it to where women are more comfortable delivering via cesarean because of that fact, because
And they
they're
can control a lot
terrified.
more.
Exactly,
They
and
can
they're
epidural, they
scared.
can do whatever, right?
But that's a major surgery. That's what I'm terrified of cesareans.
Viral infections of the eyes, and so here you can see the presentation of viral infections, conjunctivitis of the eyes are very different. You don't have that goopy stuff that you would with bacteria, right? Where sometimes with bacteria, you wake up in the morning, you can't even open your eyes, and you're like, oh my God, and you wash your eyes, and all that mucus is soluble in water, and then you open your eyes and they're blood red, right? Viral infections are a little bit different, right? Sometimes it looks like you got hit in the eye. There could be hematomas that are actually developing in the eyes because of it. Right here, this is herpes, right? You can see the complete occlusion of the eye. That's damaged eye. You're not going to be able to see out of that anymore. It's gone, right? And so herpes can infect every single tissue of the body, not just your genital and buccal cavity, everything, right? And then the amoeba also can do things, so acanthamoeba amoeba, but also other types of amoeba. And usually these things are associated with people who wear contacts and don't really take good care of their eyes nor their contacts, so they can jump in the rivers that are stagnant and then get an amoeba behind their contacts and then go to sleep with them, and then they're all in all kinds of trouble. I've heard of people using things like water from a river to clean their contacts. That's just crazy.
What?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Can,
But-
can this still happen if a person were to go to the river, get it in there, but they take their contacts
Not
off?
usually.
It has to be stuck behind, not has to be, but
Well,
it usually happens
that
by.
contact on your
on the-
eyeball
Yeah,
provides a nice environment for that amoeba to go crazy. If you leave contacts in too long, a protein will start growing on the actual contact, and when you remove it, you can really hurt your
it's
eye.
similar to the, protein that grows around like breast implants, right?
Yep. Okay. So there's a lot of things that could go wrong. Ladies and gentle dudes. So again, Provi's rules of water,
Don't go in after it rains.
and
And
it's stagnant.
if it's not moving, don't get in it,
Yeah.
and
80 degrees or less.
especially if it's warm, don't go to the cooler parts, because the amoeba like the warmer parts, especially freshwater. Amoeba don't survive in salt water. Okay?
I don't go to freshwater anymore.
No? Not even a swimming pool?
Well, that's not fresh water.
Oh, okay, okay.
That's